one of the first things to control anxiety, because I know a bunch of our listeners are listening now and they're like, oh yeah, I have a lot of anxiety, but it's not, blood transfusion or flying or, a lot of trauma. It's just, I struggle to talk to a lot of people in a social environment, or, I might struggle to, have a conversation even with my family in which a hard question is going to be asked about, something within the Catholic faith, and I don't have the answers for it. And we just start building all these different possible ways for anxiety. But regardless of what your focus on anxiety is, I think I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that neuroplasticity, its relationship to God, and then a little bit about reframing, your approach here in this cognitive behavioral therapy, and how individual men can apply that to their everyday life and in this, growth and holiness.
Yeah, that's a great question, great topic. I think when we're helping someone to reframe a challenge that right now they're currently being faced with or facing, and that they might see as a threat, what we want to do is to help them to see it as an opportunity for some kind of learning, growth, or practice. Asking the question, how can this bring out the best in you? Now, that question adapts itself to each individual and his or her circumstances. So that the question, how can this bring out the best in me right now, is like asking the question, in what way is this the perfect challenge for me right now? But I've found working with tons of people that, in fact, the challenge that they're facing right now is perfect for them. And how do you explain that? Why is it always that the challenge right now is exactly what you most need? Well, partly has to do with on our from our perspective. If something is challenging for us, if there's something that we're likely to complain about and dread, well, it's because it right now is challenging. It's because it's not easy. It's because that's actually where we need to grow. If it were easy for us, there wouldn't be growth awaiting us there. So the things that come easily no longer count as challenges because we've already grown into those habits. So the challenge is actually the edge of the growth that we have in the habits, that we're trying to forge. So if you're thinking, how can this bring out the best in me? How is this really the perfect challenge? What that's also then getting at is there a providence behind every challenge? And is there a way that I can, is this challenge actually, can it have a new light through the operation of faith in my mind? So how does faith relate to challenges? And I think it relates to them by precisely giving the widest possible context for growth that you could have, for giving so in any single challenge, faith actually can show you how this makes sense as the will of God for your sanctification. This idea that this is the will of God, your sanctification. That means that whatever is happening to you right now is the best plan for your sanctification. So we are always facing the choice between two ends. One is self-satisfaction, and the other is sanctification. And everything in us actually serves one of those ends necessarily. These are the two masters. So self-satisfaction is the same thing, I believe, as covetousness, the sense of forming an idol, out of our own desires, so that, we want them to be fulfilled and will sacrifice anything for them, versus being willing to sacrifice any satisfaction for the goal of our sanctification. So at every moment, we're actually faced with the question, what sacrifice will we make? Which is like asking, what idol or God will we serve?
Yeah.
What is going to reign in us? And we choose in every moment a life dedicated to self-satisfaction or a life dedicated to sanctification of ourselves and others. So in ourself, then it's our own growth and holiness. And then with others, it's our bond with them and our service to them. So all of that is just the work of charity. So in some way, faith lets us see every challenge in the light of charity. As the best way I can respond here is the way that it actually bring out the love of God the most in my life right now. And therefore I'm willing to sacrifice self-satisfaction for the sake of sanctification. So in the end, the best use for any challenge, is to embrace it as a means of attaining sanctification.
Wow.
So that when you feel anything in you, now, at least imagine that a person, has some addiction and they feel the pain of the craving. Okay, now that craving will either, when it gets really triggered, that will either accomplish the work of purgation in them if they lovingly embrace it and say, bring it on. The pain, that exactly is what I need to purge me. That's actually the most secure way then of being on the path of sanctification. Because if you can love the craving, you will not act on it. You only act on it to make it stop, to go away, for the purpose then of satisfying yourself. So in that case, then you lose the chance of having this deep purgation, and then you're more enslaved to it again. But that willingness is actually in our power. Reframing then lets you see things in the widest context. It brings in, what are the lasting ways that we want to grow? That was quite a lot for me to say.
That was very powerful, and it's very contrary to the temptations of the world in the flesh.